Violet and Xander descended the stairs slowly together as their mother, Ursula, called to them. In the hallway stood a man with a suitcase, whom they both disliked. "Violet, Xander, this is David," Ursula exclaimed eagerly. "As I mentioned, he'll be part of our family now." "Mom," Violet responded disdainfully, "you haven't even finalized the divorce with Dad yet." "Well, thankfully that will happen soon," her mother replied firmly, displeased that her children weren't sharing her enthusiasm. "Isn't this a bit tacky?" Violet persisted, unwilling to relent. "Violet!" Ursula snapped angrily at her daughter. "Is that his car?" Xander asked, peering through the still-open front door at the unimpressive but now familiar car in the driveway. "I thought you said he was successful. Dad just got himself a top-of-the-line Mercedes SUV. It's really cool." "Good to see you both again," David said awkwardly after Xander's less-than-flattering comparison to his father. "Yeah, I'm looking to upgrade soon too. I've got a promotion coming up, so we'll all be doing well." Neither Violet nor Xander seemed impressed. Tension hung thick in the air. "Welcome to our home, David." Ursula hissed at her children, seething at their rudeness. "Yeah, whatever," Violet muttered unkindly as they both retreated upstairs. "They just need some time to adjust," Ursula reassured a visibly upset David as her children withdrew to their rooms. "I'll talk to them. They'll come around." 6 months earlier, Violet, 16, and Xander, 12, had learned of their parents' separation due to their mother's infidelity. They had witnessed years of arguments, their mother's coldness toward their father Gary, her frequent absences with friends and family, and her excuses to be away overnight. It broke their hearts to see their father lose his dignity trying to save their marriage. Despite attempts at counseling, David was a constant presence, and Gary eventually discovered evidence of the affair, leading to divorce proceedings. After Gary moved out, tensions escalated. The divorce became bitter, with Gary seeking full custody of the children and the house while Ursula demanded alimony and supervised visitation for Violet and Xander. The home became an uncomfortable place, with the children harboring deep resentment toward their mother, who seemed oblivious due to her infatuation with David. It took half a year for the divorce proceedings to conclude, but the judge's decision left everyone dissatisfied. Gary was still obligated to pay half of the mortgage until Ursula either remarried or indefinitely, in addition to child support. Custody arrangements were complex due to the children's ages. Violet was old enough to choose her custodial parent, opting to split time between both homes, while Xander remained with Ursula during the week and visited Gary on weekends. Despite Violet's initial reluctance, she agreed for the sake of her younger brother, tearfully embracing her father when she informed him of her decision. The divorce brought Violet and Xander closer together, especially since Violet often had to care for Xander while their mother continued her relationship with David. A month after the separation, Ursula introduced David to her children during a dinner outing. It didn't take long for Violet and Xander to discern David's role. "Violet, Xander, meet David, the man I've been seeing," Ursula announced proudly, squeezing David's hand. "You mean he's the guy you cheated on Dad with?" Violet retorted, her tone sharp. Xander slouched in his chair, arms crossed, avoiding eye contact sullenly. "Violet!" Ursula exclaimed, glancing around the restaurant nervously. "It's all right, Ursula," David said with an uneasy smile, clearly uncomfortable with Violet's directness. "I wish your mother and I could have met under different circumstances, but as you grow older, you'll understand that love doesn't always follow your plans." "Yeah, Dad learned that the hard way," Violet shot back. David's expression darkened briefly, and Ursula struggled to contain her anger. "Xander, I hear you're quite the baseball player," David interjected brightly, attempting to shift the conversation. "Yeah, I'm okay," Xander replied gruffly, still avoiding David's gaze. "Maybe you and I could catch a game sometime," David suggested, smiling. "That would be great, wouldn't it, Xander?" Ursula chimed in happily. "Thank you, David." "Nah," Xander muttered. The smiles on David and Ursula's faces faded. The atmosphere at the table grew tense with Violet's hostility, Xander's sullenness, David's frustration, and Ursula's concealed anger. The rest of the meal passed in silence, and both children declined dessert, eager to leave. Both of you were incredibly rude. Ursula scolded angrily as she drove them home. David was making an effort to get to know you, and you publicly disrespected him. I don't like him, Xander spoke up from the back seat. And I can't believe you left Dad for him, Violet added bitterly. Dad is so much better than he is. Ursula wiped away a tear, visibly upset. If you just give him a chance, you might grow to love him like I do. He's a wonderful man. Violet and Xander remained silent, staring indignantly out the car window. Upon arriving home, they retreated to their rooms, leaving their mother tearfully apologizing to David over the phone for their behavior. Dad, you can't possibly be okay with this. Violet yelled in frustration at her father when she broke the news about meeting David. Can't you talk to Mom and tell her we don't want anything to do with him? No, I'm not okay with it, Gary responded, sounding exasperated at the situation. He softened his tone to calm his daughter. But this was bound to happen sooner or later. There's nothing I can do about it unless he poses a threat to you. Knowing your mother, you'll probably be seeing a lot more of him. I'm not going to punish you for how you act around him. That's up to your mother. Gary's instincts were correct. Ursula was convinced that with time, Violet and Xander would come to adore David. He was, in her eyes, too good a man for them not to. David started coming over for dinners and even stayed overnight. Despite his efforts, conversations remained minimal. He brought gifts that would end up discarded and found in the trash, unopened, after he left. Ursula attempted to integrate David further by inviting him and his parents over, referring to them as Violet's and Xander's step-grandparents. Much to her frustration and David's parents' confusion, Violet and Xander remained distant. Violet, Xander, we need to talk, Ursula addressed her children firmly, though she seethed inside. Their behavior was abnormal. She had been trying so hard to bring David into their lives, but her children stubbornly resisted. She was convinced Gary was influencing them to behave this way. I need to understand why you're treating David this way. He's been nothing but kind to you, yet neither of you is giving him a chance. Is your father telling you to act like this? Dad told us it's your problem, not his. He doesn't want to get involved, Violet retorted. And we don't like David because of what he did to Dad. I can't believe you're forcing him on us. Violet, David and I are in a loving relationship. You have to accept that, Ursula replied, frustration creeping into her voice. He's going to be part of your life whether you like it or not. She instantly regretted her harsh tone. So, you are forcing him on us. Violet shot back, voicing Ursula's worst fear. No one is forcing anyone on you. David is going to be part of our family. I just want you to accept him. Let him make you as happy as he makes me, Ursula pleaded, her frustration evident. That still sounds like you're forcing him on us. You need to accept that we don't like him and never will, Violet insisted firmly. And what about you, Xander? Do you feel the same way about David? Ursula asked, her tone accusing. Xander simply shook his head slowly in disdain. I just don't want anything to do with him. Ursula couldn't comprehend her children's behavior. Why were they acting like this? She felt increasingly exasperated and frustrated. Her relationship with David was suffering because of it. The only time they seemed to enjoy intimacy was when Violet and Xander were with their father on weekends. It felt like their relationship had been so much better when she was still married. The more Ursula dwelled on it, the more she became convinced that Gary was orchestrating the resistance against David. After her discussion with Violet and Xander, Ursula ensured that Gary had ample opportunities to see David whenever he dropped off or picked up the children. She wanted Gary to witness their happy family dynamic, believing it would undermine his influence. Initially, she took satisfaction in seeing Gary visibly affected by David's presence, but over time, he seemed to regain his composure and appeared happier. Ursula even attempted to send David to Gary's house to pick up the children out of spite, but they adamantly refused to get into his car, forcing Gary to take them home himself. Ursula's next move was to have David move in with them, despite his reluctance. She believed this would improve their situation despite the ongoing issues with Violet and Xander. Now, they found themselves with David standing at the front door, suitcase in hand, having once again been ignored by Violet and Xander while Ursula tried to console him. If Ursula thought that cohabitation would make Violet and Xander accept David, she was sorely mistaken. The household, already tense, became even more strained. Violet and Xander continued to rebuff David's attempts to connect with them. Meals were silent affairs, and any effort by David to engage them was met with uncomfortable silence until he withdrew. Xander rejected invitations to play games, and Violet sharply insisted that driving lessons were her father's responsibility. Despite Ursula's efforts to integrate David into their family, Violet and Xander remained resolute in their rejection. As tensions escalated, David began suggesting that Violet and Xander spend more time with their father, further infuriating Ursula. She confronted Gary angrily when he arrived to pick up the children. "Gary, you need to talk to your children about what they're doing to David," Ursula demanded. "Whatever you're saying to them, you need to stop." "What do you expect me to do?" Gary shrugged. "You brought that guy into their lives, not me. I know what you're up to. If you don't stop, I'll take you to court and cut off your access to Violet and Xander," Ursula threatened. "You're delusional." Gary laughed incredulously. "You cheated on me with him, and now you're upset that they won't accept your lover. Maybe starting a relationship based on infidelity wasn't such a good idea? Violet and Xander are good kids. They can think for themselves. They don't need me to tell them what's right or wrong. What happens between them and David is not my problem." Ursula scowled at her ex-husband and stormed back into the house. An attempt at a holiday only succeeded because Violet and Xander went off on their own, leaving Ursula and David alone, briefly revitalizing their strained relationship. Gary's disinterest in David and Ursula's relationship became more evident. During a dinner after Gary had dropped off Violet, she and Xander excitedly shared news of Gary's new girlfriend. She had unexpectedly visited while Gary was out, and the children were home alone. The meeting went surprisingly well, and a nervous Gary returned to find his children bonding with his girlfriend. After some awkward questions and assurances from Gary, the children embraced her, signaling a tentative thaw in their relationship. Ursula could barely contain her anger as she listened to Violet and Xander talk excitedly about their father's new girlfriend. After nearly 6 months of struggling to integrate David into their lives, their father's girlfriend was instantly embraced by her children. Despite the ongoing challenges, Ursula was determined to prove that her relationship with David was a success. She became active on social media, flooding her profiles with photos of her and David smiling and hugging, portraying them as a happy couple. She posted pictures of David attending the children's events, Xander's baseball games, and Violet's soccer matches, desperately trying to depict him as their loving stepfather. But there are limits to what one can fake. The breaking point came during Xander's birthday celebration. Ursula went all out, hosting the party at their home with elaborate decorations and inviting not just Xander's friends, but also their parents and siblings. She even referred to David's family members as Xander's and Violet's cousins. To her frustration, Xander insisted on inviting Gary, and Gary insisted on contributing to the party. Despite Ursula's efforts, David began to feel increasingly sidelined in his own home. Ursula introduced him eagerly to Xander's friends' parents, but they were more interested in catching up with Gary, whom they had known for years. Xander ignored David, refusing to take photos with him but happily posing with his father. The parents at the party started to notice the awkward dynamic, making Ursula feel that Gary was ruining her carefully planned event. Then, David did something incredible in Ursula's eyes. He unexpectedly proposed to her, presenting a ring he had secretly bought. Ursula was overwhelmed with surprise and happiness, and applause broke out as she accepted. It was, without a doubt, the happiest moment of her life. Insisting on a family photo, Ursula was oblivious to any potential criticism. For her, it symbolized the beginning of their official family unit, her, David, Violet, and Xander. Surprisingly, if Violet and Xander harbored any reservations about Ursula marrying David, they didn't show it. His proposal seemed to work wonders. They began to warm up to David, spending time with him, smiling in his presence, and engaging with him more positively. The tense atmosphere that had plagued them for months dissipated, and Ursula finally felt like they were a united family, a dream she had cherished since meeting David. In her euphoria, Ursula saw no reason to delay their wedding. It was scheduled for the start of the school summer holidays, allowing Gary to take the children while she and David went on their honeymoon. Although she had wanted to marry immediately after her divorce, practical considerations regarding the children's schooling had delayed their plans. The only dampener on her excitement was Gary's indifferent response. His emotionless congratulations and shrug of the shoulders reinforced Ursula's conviction that divorcing him had been the right decision. Everything leading up to the wedding had been flawless. The arrangements proceeded without a hitch, all invited guests confirmed their attendance, and the wedding day itself dawned sunny and warm, promising perfection. In the weeks preceding the wedding, Ursula noticed a subtle change in her children. There was a nervous excitement about them that she couldn't quite pinpoint. She assumed it was due to the upcoming wedding and the approaching school holidays. After all, they had significant roles to play. Xander was to walk her down the aisle, and Violet would be her bridesmaid. Ursula had hoped her father would walk her down the aisle, but given their disapproval of David, they would only be attending. Ursula cherished the moments of wedding dress shopping with Violet, while Xander seemed content shopping for a wedding suit with David. The wedding was set to take place at a picturesque resort hotel overlooking a serene lake. The grounds were stunning and perfect for capturing memorable photos. Ursula was more exhilarated than she had ever been in her life. During the wedding rehearsal, Ursula couldn't help but notice Violet and Xander exchanging frequent smiles. It seemed like they were plotting something, yet their previous joy and enthusiasm had mysteriously vanished. They refused to cooperate and appeared disinterested, often whispering and giggling together, making the rehearsal challenging. Ursula felt her frustration mounting, but David unexpectedly came to their defense. "Relax, they're just kids. They're probably excited or nervous," he reassured her. David's words struck a chord. After all, Violet and Xander had seemingly embraced him completely. What other reason could there be for their misbehavior? The wedding day began on a perfect note. Ursula and Violet spent the morning together, getting their hair, nails, and makeup done, enjoying the mother-daughter bonding time and looking resplendent. The caterers and florists were punctual, ensuring everything was on schedule. However, just before the ceremony was to commence, Xander went missing. Violet went off to find him and didn't return promptly. Ursula paced anxiously outside the chapel of the quaint hotel, all the guests waiting inside, including David. Where were her children? She couldn't imagine getting married without them. "Where have you two been?" Ursula demanded angrily as they finally reappeared. "Xander, where is your boutonniere?" Xander looked down, suppressing a smirk. "I must have left it in the room," he replied casually. "It's not funny." Ursula snapped, her frustration palpable. "Xander, go get it now," she ordered, her stress levels rising. An usher slipped out to check on the situation. "My son just forgot his boutonniere," Ursula laughed, trying to lighten the mood with a playful eye roll. "Boys." Inside, however, she was far from amused. 15 minutes later, Xander returned with the boutonniere in hand. Ursula snatched it from him and swiftly pinned it in place herself. She straightened his tie and adjusted his suit, determined not to let anything derail the perfect day she had meticulously planned. "Really, Xander, you're 13. You should know how to dress yourself," she scolded her son irritably. "Try to keep it together for the rest of the day." She took Xander's arm and forced a smile. "Okay, Violet, let's go." Violet opened the chapel door and led her mother and brother down the aisle. In her stress, Ursula didn't notice that Violet and Xander were not smiling. Upon reaching the end of the aisle, Ursula beamed happily at David, mouthing a quiet hi to him. She kissed both her children, who then took their seats at the front. The siblings began whispering to each other until the officiating master of ceremonies coughed and gave them a stern look, eliciting laughter from the chapel. The ceremony began, with the master of ceremonies praising Ursula's radiance and expressing happiness for her and David. He spoke of how fortunate Violet and Xander were to welcome David into their family. Ursula and David smiled warmly at the children, who returned the smile sweetly. Friends stood up and extolled Ursula and David's compatibility and how perfect they were for each other. Any lingering stress Ursula felt dissipated as happiness enveloped her. Before the vows were to be exchanged, the master of ceremonies followed protocol. I am now required by state law to ask if anyone here objects to the union of Ursula and David. The room fell silent, punctuated by a few nervous giggles, until Violet and Xander abruptly stood up and shouted in unison, "We object." Ursula spun around, her expression a mix of horror and disbelief at her children. The master of ceremonies looked taken aback, and audible gasps rippled through the guests. David stared ahead, shaking his head slowly and chuckling in disbelief. "Violet, Xander, what are you doing? This isn't funny." Ursula's eyes welled with tears, unable to comprehend why her children would disrupt what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, of all their lives. Violet spoke up, explaining their objection to the stunned guests. "Many of you may have wondered why Mom and David are marrying so soon after her divorce, and why they moved in together so quickly. The truth is, they were dating for nearly 2 years while Mom was still married to Dad. Mom cheated on Dad with David." "David, is this true?" David's parents asked, sounding mortified. David remained silent, not even turning to acknowledge the question. Disgusted murmurs filled the room. "Quiet!" Ursula hissed at Violet, panic tightening its grip. This was spiraling into a nightmare. Most of the guests had been unaware. It wasn't something she or David had wanted to broadcast. "We hate David. He's the reason our parents split up," Xander continued, his voice trembling with emotion. "Dad cried all the time because Mom was with David. We had to live with them while Mom was seeing David, then Mom forced him on us. We don't want David to marry Mom. We don't want him as our stepdad. We don't want to live with him, and we don't even want to know him. Mom, if you marry David, we want to live with Dad." Violet's voice was sharp, almost a snarl directed at her mother. "Violet, what are you saying? Please don't do this, both of you," Ursula pleaded desperately with her children. Turning to David, she added, "Give me a minute. I'll talk to them. I'll fix this." David shook his head, his tone surprisingly calm as he addressed his bride. "No way. I'm done. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life being disrespected every day by those kids. They don't like me, they'll never like me, and you know what? I don't like them either. I've wasted too much time and money on them, and all I've gotten is disrespect. I'll marry you if you choose me over them." Ursula paused, looking at David in a way that revealed she couldn't do what he asked. "I thought as much," he said, and David began to walk away. Desperately, Ursula grabbed his arm. "David, we can work this out." "No, we can't, because it's not broken. It's just reality," David replied firmly, striding out of the chapel. Tears streamed down Ursula's cheeks, mascara running as she watched her groom exit her life. "Why? Why have you done this to me?" she asked her children, her voice filled with sorrow. "We hate you for what you did to Dad," Xander replied coldly. "And then you made us live with the guy you cheated on Dad with. Who does that?" Violet's anger was palpable. "You made Dad's and our lives horrible." Clarity washed over Ursula. Throughout her time with David, she had never considered how her choices would affect her children. After she and Gary separated, she had been sure they would come to love David. How could they not? But they never did and never would. She had irreparably damaged her relationship with the two people she loved most in the world, and they might never love her again. Ursula stared at her children, collapsing to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I never knew you felt this way. I never thought any of this would happen. I love you. Please, I love you." She pleaded, arms outstretched imploringly in the now empty chapel, hoping they would embrace her. Violet and Xander didn't move towards their mother. Their brows furrowed, they looked upset themselves. Their plan had succeeded, but they hadn't anticipated reducing their mother to this pathetic, broken figure before them. "Violet, do you have your phone?" their grandmother asked gently. Violet nodded and retrieved her phone from her handbag. "You and Xander, go back to your rooms, get changed. Call your father to pick you up. You'll be staying with him full-time for a while. But Mom? Violet asked, her voice tinged with worry as she looked at her sobbing mother, feeling the weight of guilt tightening around her. Don't worry about your mother. We'll take care of her. I'll call your father tonight and explain what happened. You can see your mother in a few days once she's calmed down, their grandmother reassured them, embracing the distraught children. I'm sorry. We never expected this to happen. We thought she would just be angry with us, Violet said, visibly distressed. The children's grandmother held them close as their grandfather gently helped Ursula off the floor and led her out of the chapel. She glanced back at her children, who were now openly crying too. There's no need to apologize. Your grandfather and I never liked David or what your mother did to your father. The consequences of her actions toward you and your father are sinking in now, and it will take a toll on her. In the long term, it will be for the best, but in the short term, life is going to be very hard. She has your forgiveness to earn, and she must understand that she pushed you to this point. With your father, she'll need to establish a new cordial relationship and earn his respect again as the father of her children. What she did was terrible. I doubt your father will ever forgive her as long as he lives. Your mother has a lot of healing and learning ahead of her, possibly years of therapy. I love you, Violet. I love you, Xander. Don't worry, everything will be okay. Your grandfather and I will always be here for you. Now, let's go home. The two children left the scene of their mother's heartbreaking unraveling at their hands with their grandmother, not looking back. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel not to miss new videos.